All right, Talmud Gimel on the base, 33b. Towards the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the bottom of the page, fourth word. Okay, so yesterday we talked about these structures that aren't perfect rooms, and primarily revolves around the Achsadra. The Achsadra being the room that has 3 walls, but no entrance, just missing a fourth wall. That was the primary. We mentioned also a balcony, marfesis, but the truth is that our balconies are different today than they were. This is what he says here, and our balconies do serve as living space as opposed to the way it was then. I'm not really sure. So, from halach perspective, we left with just the Achsadra, and all the back and forth, what the Achsadra is, and someone who said, I found the Achsadra, we should have Mezuzahs, someone who says, I found the Achsadra, didn't have Mezuzahs, and we said that it depends on whether or not it has 4 walls, but just they don't reach the roof, or if it has 4 walls with big windows. And the bottom line is, as we said, because of all this back and forth, and because of the contradiction to other Gemara, the halacha is it gets a Mezuzah without a bracha. Now we also raised the issue of the Beis Shar. The Beis Shar is, as we mentioned, a gatehouse. Now, gatehouse classically meant, as we described yesterday, home or room through which you walked into somewhere, beginning of a city, into a fortress, into an estate. It was a little guardhouse through which you walked into the structure. And we also talked about this old jail that had a guardhouse positioned between two places. Now, between a home and a garden, a home and a courtyard, right? And we had 2 different versions, whether that courtyard was positioned where it had 3 doors, one coming from the public domain, and then from there to either courtyard and home, and therefore gets 3 mezuzahs, according to that understanding of the Gemara, or it's positioned after the courtyard, so public space, courtyard, Beis Shar, the gatehouse, and then the home, making it only require 2 mezuzahs, right? And what emerges from there is that this idea of Beis Shar, even though it translates literally as a gatehouse, it's come to mean, broadly speaking, an antechamber, a room that serves as an entrance to another room, even if it's not technically at the gatehouse. And that in and of itself is a big discussion in halacha, and that's what we're going to come to today. This idea of the Beis Shar, this idea of an antechamber serving not as a room in and of itself, but as a room that leads to another room. And what we'll come up with is why we have mezuzahs on the elevator here. I was actually wondering about it. Recently, a couple of years ago, my father decided to put mezuzahs on the elevators, and we'll see from our Gemara today why we have that and where it comes from. Now, with respect to the properties of the actual Beis Shar, the actual antechamber, does it have to be, right? In other words, the general principle is, as we just explained, or as we emerged from yesterday, that the antechamber, even if in and of itself doesn't require mezuzah, let's say if it had a Beis Shar at the entrance of some forest, I don't know. So maybe you would get the mezuzah without a bracha like the Achsadra from yesterday's Gemara. But once the antechamber, like we saw the case of the jail, where it's attached to an actual room, it requires a mezuzah because it serves as an antechamber to a room, right, to a proper house. So it also gets, right, the pasuk says at the doorways of your home and your gates. Gates, presumably the gates that lead to your house, right? So this little gatehouse gets to your house if it's directly attached to it, and therefore gets a mezuzah. That's what we emerged from yesterday. So the question becomes, if that room needs all of the specifications of a normal, ordinary house that requires mezuzah, 4x4 amos, a roof, all the other details we mentioned. So to the discussion, and
does dwelling have anything to do with it?
Yeah, so that becomes the question. In other words, an antechamber could be, let's say, a small little.
It's just a corridor to something else.
Yeah.
It's not the place that people would dwell in, right?
Yeah, so think of the especially in Canada where you have an extra room to keep the air out. It's a little place where you put your boots and your coat.
Like a mud room.
Yeah, it could be tiny, but it serves as an antechamber or something else. So does that room need to have all the specifications of 4x4 amos in order for it to have mezuzah? What if it doesn't have a roof? Or getting back to our previous discussion, is it supposed to be open-aired? Right, we discussed that if it's supposed to be open-aired, then it still gets a mezuzah, because it's not, the fact that it has no roof doesn't disqualify it as a living space. It's supposed to be open-aired. Right? I don't think we talked about it on the video, but we were talking about how if you have like a in your house a section of your house which is built with a cutout roof, right? You're living in Florida, so you don't have snow all year long. You have nice weather. So in the middle of your house, you have an open roof, and one room is kind of quasi indoor outdoor. You would get a mezuzah there, even though it's lacking a roof. Because that's what it's supposed to be, because it's living up to its thing. So all of these specifications, when it comes to the base shar, it's a discussion whether it needs to have those things, or, in other words, in order to get a mezuzah, does it have to have all these specifications, it's living up to a proper living standard? Or because it's serving the inside, doesn't need it at all? Because it's only a service to get to a proper room. That's a discussion. And he concludes here, this is the Schevas Hadar, he concludes that it gets a mezuzah without a bracha. Because of this doubt.
So if it would have,
and he goes back and forth in the footnotes. If it's supposed to be that way, it's not supposed to be that way, so it's not so clear. Sorry?
No, I'm saying if it had all the elements of the.
If it had all the elements, it was 4x4. So that's right. If it was not a bracha. If it's 4x4 and all that stuff, good. That's correct. At any rate, now the Gemara today is going to, let's just assume the Beis Shar has all the specifications. This gatehouse, this gate room, is antechamber, and today is the official source for that law of the antechamber. This is the original source for it. Yesterday we introduced it by way of discussing entrances to courthouses and to courtyards and prisons, and now we're discussing the actual law itself. Yeah, we're clear? So Tana Rabbanan, our sages taught, Beis Shar, an antechamber, Hapasuach, which is open, Legina, to a garden, Veli Kitonius, and to a little room, just a proper room. I don't know why the Gemara decides to call it Kitonius, but it means a proper room. So this gatehouse serves both a garden and a proper room. So I want to clarify, when we say garden, a garden here means not a garden like we have a leisure garden where you plant a couple of fruits to hang out in. That would require mezuzah. It's a proper living room. Here when we say garden, we mean it's almost an orchard. It's not exactly an orchard. There's a certain definition when it comes to Shabbos as to what the size of a garden officially is. But we're talking about a garden that's not a living space, and therefore does not get a mezuzah. If you had a door to your orchard, you don't need a mezuzah there. So you can kind of imagine it's like that. It's not exactly an orchard. It's not that big, but it's not a leisure garden like we have, a couple of flowers and a bench. If you have that, then you are required for mezuzah. So this antechamber opens to two places. Opens to this garden, which does not require mezuzah, and it opens to a room, which does require mezuzah. So it serves an antechamber to both. Okay? Rabbi Yossi says, Nidon kikitonies. The primary here is the room, and therefore this antechamber is in service of the room, and therefore does get a mezuzah. The sages say,
I'm sorry, there's one door within this?
Good question. Okay, so the original Tanaic text there is two doors, clearly. Or maybe even three.
Okay.
Maybe even three if it's coming from the public. But let's just work with only two that we're going from to the garden and to the home. Right? So the original text, the Mishnaic text which we're quoting here, does not discuss which door we're talking about. It doesn't say I'm talking about this door versus that door.
It just says it requires a mezuzah.
It just says, do I consider it part of the garden, or do I consider it an extension of the home? So the sages of the Gemara will discuss which door are they talking about, and that's going to change our law, giving us the definition of what the halacha is. So it's the original text. The original text of Rabbi Yossi says the antechamber is in service of the room, and therefore gets a mezuzah, without specifying which door he's talking about. The Chachamim and the sages say, Nidon kebeis shar, it serves as a freestanding antechamber that doesn't service anything required mezuzah, meaning it services the garden. Right? We said yesterday that an antechamber that isn't attached to a home is the same thing as an echsadra, as this portico, right? And therefore would not get a mezuzah, at least not biblically speaking, right? Or at least not with a bracha.
Just without a bracha.
Because of this whole doubt, but let's just say, biblically speaking, it doesn't get a mezuzah,
right.
At least from our Gemara's perspective, even though it's other Gemara. So this antechamber, even though it's attached to a room, but because it's attached to a garden, it's in service of the garden, and therefore doesn't get a mezuzah. This is the dispute between Rabbi Yossi and the sages. Now, to your point, which door they're talking about. There's more than one door to this antechamber, to this base shar. So this is end of the text of the Talmudic age, of the Mishnaic age. Now comes the sages of the Gemara age, discussing and analyzing that text. Rav and Shmuel, the Omri Tarvayu, they were discussing this text, and they both agreed that Migina Labayas, there's two different versions of Rashi, we're going to stick with one of them, the one that Rashi says is the primary in his understanding. Migina Labayas, the door which takes you into the home. That is to say, if you were walking from the garden into the home, right, and you're going through the antechamber, then you're walking through the door between the antechamber and the home. Yeah. So that kula amalei pligi, everybody agrees the chai this requires mezuzah. This is what Rav and Shmuel say. So the door between the antechamber and the house clearly needs a mezuzah because it services getting into the house. My taima, what's the reason? Bia debayasi. It's an entrance to a home. Why shouldn't they get a mezuzah? So where's the dispute between the sages and Rabbi Yossi? Ki pligi, where's the argument? Me bias legina. If I were to walk from the home to the garden, and I'm going through the antechamber, right? Yeah. Then the last door, the door which takes me from the antechamber into the garden, is in service of not the home, but the antechamber. In service of not the home, but the garden. And therefore, there's a dispute between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim. Mar Savar, Rabbi Yossi is of the view that the room is the primary, and therefore, even the door between the garden and the antechamber is really only a service to the home, even though it technically takes me out to the garden. But where does it take me out from?
The house. From
my house. So it's primarily serving my house, and therefore gets a mezuzah. Now, which side would it go on? The right or the left? There's a discussion on that. It depends on where the public is. Where's the public space?
Oh, it doesn't matter which way the...
So let's just keep the Chabad custom out where we're using the door swinging. Right. Leave that for a second aside, which I'm not really sure actually what the Chabad custom would be in this case, but let's just stick without the Chabad custom. Then it would depend on where the entrance to the public is. Is the entrance to the public on the other side of the garden? So you're walking from the garden to the antechamber, from the public to the garden to the antechamber to the home, then you do it on the right side going inward towards the home.
Well,
following?
Yeah, but the thing is, if it's primarily serving the public, that's not the public's home, and therefore...
It's primarily serving, in this view of Rabbi Yossi, it's primarily serving the house, and therefore gets a mezuzah. But the question is serving the house in what sense? It's serving the house that I enter the house through the garden, or serving the house in that I go out of my house into the garden?
Correct.
Well, that would depend on where the entrance to the public is. Is the entrance to the public on the other side of the home? So I walk from the home to the antechamber to the garden. Then I have mezuzah going on the right side, going out all the way, walking farther away from the entrance to the public, which is at the front of the house. Right? Or if the entrance to the house is on the other side of the garden, so I walk from the public to the garden, no mezuzah because it's a garden. Well, let's say there's no door there. Let's just assume there's no door there. Make it less complicated. From the public to the garden to the antechamber to the house. And I would do it on the right side, going in towards the house. Because the Gemara here doesn't discuss where the public entrance is. It just discusses these three things related to each other, not where the public is. Now, what if the antechamber had three doors? One from the public, and then you go to the right to the garden, left to the house?
It's also servicing the house.
It's also serving the house.
So then in that argument, you would...
make the mezuzah go on the right side, going out to the garden, because you're coming from your house to the garden. Because the garden never gets the mezuzah. So it would never be on the right side going into the garden unless that's the way you're coming out from your house. Because it's not servicing the garden, it's servicing the house. Remember that. Clear?
I'm still not clear on which side you put it on. You put it on the side that from where the traffic is primarily?
No. Well, relative to the house.
Relative to the house,
Right.
Okay.
The question is, how do you get from the public into your house? However you get from the public into your house, you're putting mezuzah on the right side all the way going in.
Okay.
Now, from my house to the garden, right? Where do I put the mezuzah? I put the mezuzah based on my exit from my house into my garden.
The right side.
The right side going to the garden.
Yeah.
But not because the garden requires mezuzah, because it's the exit from my house. Right? Unless the garden is part of my entrance to my house, meaning I walk from the public into the garden, no mezuzah there, because let's say there's no door there, and then from the garden into the antechamber, and from the antechamber into my house. Then in that case, that's on the right side going into the antechamber, because that's the entrance from the public. Right? So it's the way of traffic relative to exit and entering my house. Because that being the primary place I want to go. That's Rabbi Yossi's view. Okay? But Umar Savar, the Chacham, the sages say, Gina Iker, the primary service of the antechamber is not to my home, but to the garden. And therefore, the door between my home and the antechamber gets a mezuzah, because that's an entrance and exit to my home. But the door between the antechamber and the garden does not get a mezuzah, because primarily this antechamber serves the garden, not my home. This is Rav and Shmuel. Clear? Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, however, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, they are the reverse of Rav and Shmuel. Good morning. Yosef. Third to last line. End of the line. Rabbi of Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, the Amrita Avayu, they both discussed the same text, and they came to the exact opposite conclusion of Rav and Shmuel. The Amrita Avayu, both of them said like this: Mibayis Legina, everybody agrees that the antechamber, the door between the antechamber and the garden, everybody agrees, loy pli, they're not arguing the putter that it's not putter. That's exempt from mezuzah.
It's exempt.
It's exempt. Because in their view, everybody agrees the antechamber serves the garden. But my time, what's the reason? Pischat deginahu, it's an entrance to a garden, doesn't get a mezuzah. Again, an orchard / garden. Ki pligi, where's the dispute between Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi? Migina labayis, that door between the antechamber and the home. Mar Savar, Rabbi Yossi says, Bia debayasu, it's an entrance to the home. And Mar Savar, and the sages say, Kula adaita degina, the entirety is all related to the garden. Even the door between the home and the antechamber is only a exit or entrance to the garden, and therefore no mezuzah. So, 3 different views. 2 views, but based on how you explain them, it becomes 3 different views. One view is the primary service of the antechamber is for the home, and therefore all doors get a mezuzah relative to entry and exit of your home. That's Rabbi Yossi's view in Rav and Shmuel. View number 2 is that I agree with you that this antechamber services the home, and that for the door between the antechamber and the home gets a mezuzah, but the antechamber also serves the garden, and therefore the door between the garden and the antechamber doesn't get a mezuzah. That's the sages in Rav and Shmuel's view. Third view, which is also the view of Rabbi Yossi in Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef's view. Right? They overlap there. Because in Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef's view, everybody agrees that the door between the garden and the antechamber does not get a mezuzah. So the sages of Rabbi and Shmuel are the same as Rabbi Yossi in Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef. The third view is, which is the sages according to Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, no doors get a mezuzah because it all services the garden. Because it all services the garden. Even though one technically happens to go to the home. Clear? Okay, so it's 3 views. It's 4 views, but 2 of them overlap, depending on how you interpret the original text. So let's see the halacha.
So in the third view,
No rooms get a mezuzah.
No door.
Sorry.
Not even the one that's going from the home to the antechamber to the garden.
Correct.
Will not get a mezuzah.
Because the entire antechamber is in the service of the garden.
Service of the garden, and in the other case, it's in the service of the house.
Not even without a
where they all
bracha.
get.
Sorry?
Not even without a bracha. No mezuzah.
It would seem. Look, you're not forbidden from putting one up, so
But
you wouldn't be allowed to make a bracha.
Definitely no bracha.
So you wouldn't be, in this view, you wouldn't be allowed to make a bracha, but you're completely exempt. But it doesn't. It's not forbidden.
Right, not forbidden, but
Exactly.
I don't think it's ever forbidden, unless you're putting 2 mezuzahs on one side. Then it might be an issue about taisif where you're adding mezuzah, where you're adding to the mitzvahs. But a door that's not you're in doubt, or even if you're not required, it's not about taisif. You're allowed to put mezuzah there. At any rate, you're exempt in that view. So now let's see the halacha. Sorry?
Garden, does it afford the protection, though, if you're putting up...
That's a good question. And it seems it does, from the famous story of Onkelos. From the famous story of... I mentioned this before. Was it Behuda Nasi? who gave a Roman a mezuzah just for protection. Right? Who was the sage? It was a famous story. He gave it. The king gave him treasuries, and he said, "I have to guard it." And he gave him in return a mezuzah, and says the mezuzah guards you, even though this person wasn't putting mezuzah on the door, wasn't Jewish. He's just going to leave it somewhere. There are times, I mentioned this, there are times I never told people to take mezuzahs to the hospital and just to have it lying there as a kind of skula, as a kind of protection. Even though it isn't necessarily required and doesn't do any mitzvah. At any rate, that's one of the reasons why people add mezuzahs to these doors even when you don't really need one. So let's see the halacha. Abaye and Rava, Avdi, they both, I guess they had a home that looked like this, a garden, an antechamber, and a room, and the home. They did Karabba of Rav Yosef. They did like Rabba and Rav Yosef. It doesn't say if they followed Rav Yossi according to Rabba and Rav Yosef, or they followed the sages according to Rabba and Yosef. It doesn't say which one they did, but it just says that they followed Rabba and Rav Yosef's interpretation. I guess the Gemara doesn't elaborate on that because we don't follow the halacha like Rabba and Rav Yosef anyway, as we'll see momentarily. Rav Ashi, who is Ravina and Rav Ashi Soifayra. Ravina and Rav Ashi at the end, Rav Ashi and his colleague, the sage Ravina, who together were the final editors of the Gemara. So what they did at their time is usually accepted as halacha. So Rav Ashi did Avid Kerav Shmuel L'chumra. He did like Rav and Shmuel in the more stringent manner. What's the more stringent manner? Rabbi Yossi, according to Rav and Shmuel, namely, they both get a mezuzah in the service of the house. All doors in the service of the house with a bracha. So what we have here is v'hilchas, and the law is Rav and Shmuel l'chumra. The law is Rav and Shmuel l'chumra. Like Rashi says, umatzich mezuzah l'tavayu. You need mezuzah for both doors. The top line of Rashi, the right side. This free like Rav Yossi, because they follow Rav Yossi. That's what l'chumra means, which means, in other words, and this is the conclusion we're coming to, that all doors that are in service of, in any way, shape, or form, if they're in service of a room that requires a mezuzah, even though it's also in service of a room that doesn't require mezuzah, you still put up mezuzah.
With a bracha.
With a bracha.
On all those.
On any door leading to the primary home. This is the law of the Beis Shar. Even though Beis Shar technically means a gatehouse that we're talking about, the entrance to a city or the entrance of a fortress, whatever it is, but the law, when we use the term Beis Shar in halacha, it's a borrowed term to say any antechamber that's servicing another room that is required of mezuzah. Clear? And this is the halacha. We'll see in a moment. At least we'll begin it now. We'll get more details, God willing, tomorrow. Maybe we'll look at the halacha also. But in a moment we get to ancient elevators. This is the next line.
So, for example, I've got some confusion here.
Yeah.
If I enter my house, okay, the first door, it's obvious need a mezuzah. Now I have a door on the
One
back.
second. First door.
First door is the entrance.
What are we talking about? Your house?
House, right.
Yeah.
But then, at the end, there's a door leading to the balcony.
Sure, get some
So
mezuzah.
does this fall under this principle, or it's another principle? I put a mezuzah there, but...
It's another principle. I mentioned this earlier, that even though the Gemara said yesterday balcony is kind of like an achsadra, but our balconies today are part of our living space.
Okay.
Our balconies are considered normal
So it
living
doesn't come
space.
under the-
It's just quite because it's part of your home.
Here we're talking about courtyards more, or...
Orchards, almost.
Okay.
Even though it says gina, a garden, because it's not as big as an orchard, but it means basically
Right.
it's almost a big.
Also, they had like vegetable gardens. That was very common. Right?
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm using the word orchard. In English, orchard is exclusive to trees. I just meant that it's not a garden with flowers and a bench.
It's a vegetable garden. Yeah.
A vegetable garden. Sorry, I didn't mean orchard as in
Yeah.
fruits, not
Yeah.
vegetables. I just meant that it's not.
For
It's not for leisure and reading a
no,
book.
it's
It's
for-
meant for growing food to
Yeah.
eat.
For
That's right.
example, in Quebec history, we lived there some years ago in elementary
Homestead.
school, that every Quebec, not even a person living in a city, had a little garden in his either front or
Homestead.
backyard. No, even like in Montreal.
No, you know what homestead
Yeah,
is?
but you
Yeah.
can have it on the roof too, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
because
Is it the homestead? The homestead means people who rely on their own produce,
Yeah, but
as opposed to buying.
It was small.
Yeah.
Like they have pictures of old Montreal, like in the downtown area, 2 or 3 years ago. They had a little garden and chickens.
But it also depends on what the story is. A little Shulchan Aruch is a little different, but it depends
Yeah,
also.
But if everyone had it because.
Yeah, but if you had a bench, if you had a bench in there to sit and read,
of course.
then you need a mezuzah.
Yeah.
So it means when we say garden, it means exclusively for making plants to eat, not for living.
Carrots, things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone had their own little.
Let's at least begin. And no fool, I have enough time for this. Let's at least begin this. We're going to begin this now, and we'll come back review tomorrow and look a little bit more at the halacha. So, having mentioned this idea of antechambers, the Gemara is going to raise a similar situation of an antechamber, but kind of a unique one, which is ancient elevator, as I mentioned. How so? Itma we've learned. Lu pasuach mibein habayis la'aliyah. Itma means we've learned. It's similar to Tana Rabbanon, except that we're introducing a text from the Mishnayik, from the Gemara age, not from the Mishnayik age. But it's kind of a text, or at least it's a teaching that has been codified and passed down. So what does it say? Lo pasuach, a space, an open space between 2 floors, top floor and bottom floor. So what happens? Top floor and bottom floor are 2 different apartments, let's just imagine. And they don't want to waste space of their floors with steps. Steps take up a lot of space of your living space, right? You have to cut out a whole bunch of floors so you can have steps going down. So what do? You cut a square in the whole in the floor between between upstairs and downstairs. You put a ladder between top and bottom.
A dumbbell.
Sorry?
They had that in ancient times when you had a dumbbell. You had food coming.
Dumbwaiter, you mean?
A dumbwaiter.
A dumbwaiter.
Similar
You
idea.
Where you had the food being.
But here people walk
I
through.
think IGA has something.
This is the
like
key
that,
here.
yeah, like
The key here is that people walk through. So what do? You have an elevator going up and down.
Yeah.
Now, a ladder going up and down.
Yeah.
Now, the bottom floor would have 4 walls going around the entirety of that ladder.
I'm sorry, can you repeat
The
that?
bottom floor
Yeah.
would have 4 walls going around the entirety of that ladder, of that open space.
Okay.
So in order to get to the ladder, you have to walk into another room, essentially. To open a door, walk into another room, climb up the ladder. Now what happens when you get to the top floor? There's 4 walls around you again. You got to knock on the door of your neighbor and say, "Can I come in?" And this is the way of separating 2 apartments.
Oh, interesting.
Ancient elevators. So there's a door at the bottom, door at the top. So now this is like an antechamber. It's not a living space.
So in other words,
No one lives in
access
there.
The ladder, you had to open a door.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a way of separating between 2 apartments.
Right.
Okay.
So you have a door at the bottom in the bottom apartment to get into the ladder. Then you climb up the ladder and you get into another door to get to the top apartment. All right?
It could be steps too, actually.
It could be steps also in theory also.
Yeah, but small.
It's smaller, the point is. It could be steps in theory also. The point is that this is an antechamber to get to another room. So what's the halacha for such a thing?
And the reason it's closed because you don't want people walking in the house on either side.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
We want to keep 2 apartments separate.
Separate.
So it's closed.
Yeah. Perfect.
So it's literally an antechamber between 2 homes. Not a living space, but it serves a living space.
Serves it.
But
Yeah.
serves the entrance of the house.
It serves the living space. It's an antechamber. This is the Beis Shar. But it's not a Beis Shar being like this. It's a Beis Shar that extends horizontally as opposed to vertically as opposed to horizontally. That's all. So let's see. Amar Hunu says, Im yesh Pesach echad, if it has 1 door, so the guys downstairs aren't so particular about keeping their door closed or insulating the ladder. The guys on the top do want to insulate. They don't want it to be falling down, so they have a door up
So
there.
it's a door on the floor that opens.
No.
No, it's just.
It's 4 walls.
Okay.
It's a little room you walk into that has a ladder.
Got it. Okay.
So you walk into a little
Trying to
room,
visualize
and there's a hole, and then there's a ladder you go down.
Okay.
And the bottom, you open up a room.
Right, right.
You open the door, there's a room, and in the room, there's nothing else in there but a ladder going up.
Okay.
So the ladder's replacing the stairs.
Yeah. Or the way you can think about it is in a duplex. But instead of it, there's some duplexes where you have 2 entrances at the front,
Yeah.
separate entrances, and some duplexes where you walk into a room, and the only thing there is in the room is either another door to go into the house,
Okay, you have a common.
or steps going up to the, and the top steps. There's another ladder. So basically, it's a room that extends vertically or diagonally up
Diagonally. Right.
with stairs inside. So in this case, it's the same thing. It's just vertical with ladder.
Got it.
Same kind of thing. So if it only has 1 door, either at the top or the bottom, whoever decides to have a door, whichever one, Chayav mezuzah, it requires a mezuzah. It's an antechamber to the other room or to your own apartment. Im yesh beis psachim, if it has two doors, one on top, one on bottom, chayav b'shtei mezuzahs, it requires both mezuzahs. We're going to stop here. That at least what you have here now is what an elevator is. Why is it different than an elevator? Because one happens to be a moving box that carries you up, and one's a ladder that you have to walk up yourself. Both of them are vertical shaped room that are antechambers going to a different home. This is what Rabbi Blau in the Chayv Sadar argues. That this antechamber
It's just a movable.
is just a movable one. He argues, where is it? Yeah, that the entrances to elevators require mezuzah because
Services.
he says that our elevators are exactly the description I just gave to you. It just happens instead of being a ladder, it's a box that moves up electronically up and down. Mm-hmm. But why shouldn't it be the same thing? So we're gonna get to more details tomorrow. But just to say now, which side of the door would you put the mezuzah on? In this ladder, in this elevator.
The one that services the.
Services who?
It's like a door. It's like a door between two rooms.
Were you servicing downstairs or
Well, it depends who the public is.
Yeah.
So when you come in from the public to the main floor, then the mezuzah would be on the right side, going in to the elevator.
It'd be on the right.
Yeah.
On the right side, going into the elevator because you're going deeper into the house.
Depends who you're visiting.
Well, the majority of traffic. The only way to get to the farthest inside part of the house is to go this way through the elevator. And then when you get to the top floor, it would be on the right side going out into the.
Because that's the flow of traffic from out
Yeah,
to.
yeah. There's a discussion about Heker Tzir, but again, in Chabad we don't follow the traffic. We follow the
Hinge.
hinges. So exactly, what is the elevator opening? There's no hinges, but there's a sliding door. Does it indicate to you?
It's coming from one side.
Does it indicate to you what's considered inside and what's considered out? I don't know. You know what you should do?
Well.
So the one up here, I noticed the elevator up here is on the right side coming into the hallway, going out from the elevator into the hallway, which is exactly what I just described. But I should have looked to see downstairs how it is. Is it going into the elevator mezuzah or going out? Something to think about for tomorrow, see if we can come up with something. Some homework. All right, have a wonderful day.